and welcome to the podcast where we will be talking about exploring endoscopy. Um, I have my co-host with me. You want to
Hey,
introduce yourself?
hey, I'm Kyle, and yeah, let's dive into it.
So we're excited to take you on a journey through fascinating world of endoscopy. So today we'll discuss why endoscopy is such a crucial tool in modern medicine. What else did you want to cover in this
Yeah.
podcast?
I just want you guys to stick with us as we break down what endoscopy is, its different types, the benefits, and key takeaways for those considering it.
Okay, so we'll just start with the basics. So, what is endoscopy? So, per the Mayo Clinic, the definition provided was endoscopy is a medical procedure that allows doctors to look inside the body using a flexible tube with a camera.
Wow, that's crazy, but I bet it helps out a lot with today's surgeries.
And what makes it even better is that it's minimally invasive, meaning less pain and faster recovery for patients.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You know, there are several types of endoscopy depending on which part of the body needs examination.
Exactly. You have gastrointestinal endoscopy for the stomach and intestines. You have bronchoscopy for the lungs. You have laparoscopy for abdominal conditions. And basically, endoscopy, that word, it just means looking inside with an endoscope. So let's talk about endoscopes. And which is that endoscopes is an instrument used to examine the interior of a hollow organ or a body cavity. And they use fiber optics and LED, which is light emitting diodes. And that's what carries the light.
And it makes me think, I'm not sure, but back when I had my surgeries on my meniscus, I think that's what they used because I didn't have any major scars after the surgery. I think
Mm-hmm.
that it was minimal incisions that they did, two little small cuts.
Right.
So I think they used the camera to look in there and fix that problem I had.
Right. So and that helps too because the second function of endoscopes is to transmit the reflected image back to the surgeon's eye to a video system, and they can see it on a bigger, screen to help them see the part that they're operating on more clearly, which will
Right.
make the surgery, more efficient, and it'll decrease the chance of mistakes during the surgeries.
Yeah, man, technology is awesome.
Yeah, for sure. And when we talk about endoscopes, we definitely have to say that it's important to properly classify the type of endoscope in use because the function, care, and handling processes are different for each classification. And while taking my course in sterile processing and surgical instrumentation, I learned that we have different types. We have like rigid, we have semi rigid, and we have flexible endoscopes. So there are different endoscopes that you can use to see different parts depending on the surgery that you are having or procedure you are having.
That's a lot of information.
Right. So let's talk about how do you decide what endoscope to use. And basically, they're chosen by the physician based on the type of procedure that they're performing, which we already talked about. And we can talk about rigid endoscopes first if you want to dive into that. So, what have you learned about rigid endoscopes?
Uh,
Like as far as the material and things,
uh,
what makes them so rigid?
well, I actually learned that they are actually manufactured using tubes of stainless steel.
Yeah.
and they are designed to allow for some minimal flexing of the shaft, but damage will occur beyond the flex limits.
Right. So that means don't bend it beyond the flex limits. Don't try to bend it out. Don't try to force it to do something that it can't do.
Right.
Yeah, because you don't want to break it. Because I'm sure damage and repair is very costly. But we'll talk about that later on.
Right.
Yeah.
So you better know what it's used for.
Yeah.
Man.
So, and that's a general rule with the rigid endoscope that it should not be bent because we have semi-rigid endoscopes, and that's because the shaft is made of a very thin stainless steel and it bends slightly without kinking the metal. So, do you have any questions about or any comments to make about the semi-rigid endoscopes, or like basically what's what type of procedure is used for?
Uh, the semi-rigid endoscopes are primarily used in urology to view the bladder and the distal portion of the ureter.
Right. And because those parts of the body are they're in a hard spot, so they need to be able to bend slightly more than a rigid endoscope, which we wouldn't use for that, you know?
Gotcha. And I know you don't want to have those scars, so it probably helps them out
Right.
without cutting them wide open, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it's safer.
Yeah.
It's safer than using an instrument that could possibly damage the insides or, damage the endoscope.
Yeah.
So I know that we were going to talk about it, so let's go ahead and get into it about the damaging and repair of endoscopes. No, that is a very, very, very costly. So that's why it's important you want to process these things correctly.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make sure they're used correctly. You want to make sure the physician or whoever is using it, the surgeon, that they're using it properly. They're not overbending it, and that it's being processed correctly. And that's where sterile processing comes in. You want to make sure that your sterile processors know how to clean these things, and that's where we use our instructions for use and our manufacturing IFUs. And you want to use, so specifically, you want to disassemble these endoscopes because you don't want water to get in places that it shouldn't be. And then you want to use a cleaning solution that's identified in the manufacturer's IFUs. And I'm just going down the list per what we've learned. You want to hand wash the endoscope using a soft, non-leaching cloth.
Mm-hmm.
And pay particular attention to the distal tip, as this is where the debris collects and is most difficult to remove. So this is the area where it can get tight and you're not able to clean in between those areas. So you want to pay close attention to that.
So you really want to make sure who's ever doing the job, the physician or the sterile tech, it's not nobody is cutting corners.
Right.
It's very detailed, very serious.
Right. Very true. And if the endoscope has a working channel, you have to thoroughly brush the channel using the manufacturer's recommended brush type and size. So you can't use whatever you want to use to clean the instrument. And once the endoscope is clean and flushed out, you want to just make sure that you have removed all traces of the cleaning solution, and you want to dry the endoscope as well. Do you have any questions or comments about the cleaning of it?
Not really. I mean, that's some good information. What about the inspection process though?
So the inspection process is very important because you want to ensure the proper function of the endoscope after it has been cleaned. And that is so important because it needs to be, the endoscope has to be checked after every use. After every use. You cannot skip in between. You don't want to do every other procedure where you check it. You don't want to do that because you want to make sure there's no leakage. You want to make sure that it's functioning properly. You want to make sure nothing is broken that could possibly fall off in a patient's body.
Wow.
Yeah, that's very important. Very important.
So, are there any benefits?
Yeah. For one, it helps detect diseases early, which is vital for conditions like cancer. And that's via the World Journal of Gastroenterology. And because it's minimally invasive, recovery times are much shorter compared to traditional surgery.
Yeah, that had to be what I used then
Right.
on my meniscus tear
I couldn't
because
imagine having a surgery like that though.
yeah, hey, it was. I think I had a short recovery time with that, and that's
Hmm.
probably why.
Right. And it allows doctors to perform procedures like biopsies and even some surgeries without large incisions like yours.
Oh,
Yeah. There's a lot of research backing its effectiveness. For instance, studies show that upper endoscopy can detect early stage stomach cancer before symptoms appear, which is what I mentioned earlier about being able to detect early signs of disease in the body.
that could be very helpful. And as the technology advances, I know it's probably only going to get better and more precise.
For sure. For sure. So, I also wanted to talk about repair. Repairs of these complex surgical instruments
Hmm.
and how costly they can be. And this is why we have to make sure that our sterile processors are trained correctly on how to clean these instruments effectively. And I know they are under a time restraint.
Hmm.
So they need to be cleaned timely, but they need to be cleaned correctly. And that's so important because physical damage due to mishandling and lack of or improper preventive maintenance can cause damage to these complex surgical equipment.
That can probably get expensive too, huh?
Very, very, very expensive, I could imagine. So I just wanted to cover what we've talked about, honestly, before we close out. We discussed what endoscopy was and the different types and its many benefits. We also shared expert insights on how it helps detect diseases early and reduces recovery time. What have
Yeah,
you learned from this about endoscopy and
man.
endoscopes? What have you learned from cleaning them? And
Uh, I learned that it's very serious, uh, very detailed. Someone shouldn't be cutting corners because it could be costly in repairs. Uh, I don't know. It's just like it's more serious than I thought it was,
hmm
and I think the benefits are awesome with the minimal incisions and the fast recovery for patients. I know it works out better for the patient. So
right. And I know I forgot. There's one more important endoscope type that
what's
we
that?
forgot to mention. The flexible ones.
The
We
one that.
talked about rigid, we talked about semi-rigid, but we didn't talk about flexible. And flexible endoscopes,
Uh huh.
they are so because they are flexible. I'm sure they're used more than a semi-rigid or a rigid. Um,
Probably so
yeah,
because you can probably use them on multiple different parts. I'm guessing.
right. And I know the care. We also learned that the care and handling can often be complicated due to the instrument design, but that's why we have to be trained correctly on how to clean these endoscopes.
That's awesome.
So, honestly, if you or someone you know is considering an endoscopy, now you have a clearer picture of what to expect.
Absolutely. And we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts or experiences in the comments.
Thank you for tuning in to Explore Endoscopy with me and Kyle.